So I'm going to jump right into this video on my very first ever epoxy pour build. And the wood I'm using for this video is a spalted poplar. I love the black lines in this, and I'm going to be pouring black epoxy to highlight those lines. One of the things you want to make sure when you're building your mold, so you don't repeat the same issues I had, is make sure you measure your materials first. I made the mistake of thinking I had a much bigger piece of wood than I did. So I ended up cutting this mold about 3 times because the first time I was trying to make a 24 by about 50 inch build, and then I thought that was too big. So then I moved on to a 48 by 24, and then I happened to measure my material and realized that was too short. So I ended up with 46 inches by 24 still. And this mold is built with silicone in between all the pieces that are nailed together, and silicone in all the corners, as you'll see in a second. I didn't get any video of me cutting this piece in half, so without further, let's get to mixing the epoxy. With the epoxy mixed up, I can now move on to the pour. I did forget to mention previously that I did spray this down with silicone spray. That way it should be easier to remove this from the mold once I'm done. Also, usually I would wipe this down. However, when I went to walk up the stairs after I sprayed it, I nearly did a banana slip and fell on my butt. So I think with that much overspray, I think I hit all of it. I also let the epoxy sit for 10 minutes before I poured, and then hit it with my heat gun, which I'll show you in a little bit, because I'll be doing the same thing with this to get all the extra air bubbles out of it. So let's start with this pour. I also should mention I'm doing 2¼ gallons of epoxy on this pour. That should give me enough to easily fill up this centerpiece. And it should also give me enough to cover all of the top of the boards. And then that'll give me some extra stuff to remove when I'm planing. And it'll also keep it so that way I don't get major warping in this project from the board sitting for 2 weeks. Because I didn't seal any of the edges because it should be covered all by this epoxy. So off camera real quick, I did have to add an extra 1.5 pints of epoxy to this, which is why you see the 2 big circles in there. But I'm going to hit it with the heat gun to try to get rid of all these extra air bubbles. And then there's going to be some spots where it's still leaking epoxy into the inside of the wood where there was holes, as you can see from this bubbling here and then bubbling here. So I'm just going to have to give that a little bit longer to let the epoxy set in there. So this will sit for about 2 weeks to let it fully harden, and then I'll go in and I'll plane it back down to the wood, and then I'll show you that process once we get to it. So it's only been a second for you all. However, it's been 2 weeks for me. It's been like watching paint dry, waiting for this to harden up. However, it's finally hard. It's nice and solid. So cross your fingers. We're about to open up this mold. Hopefully it comes out very easily. have my flattening jig all set up. We're going to go ahead and get all this epoxy off. Couple quick notes if you're doing what I'm doing. If you have to level the platform you're working on because you don't have a permanent structure, you just want to make sure you support it throughout the whole length of it. I had another project where the center ended up being about a 1/4 inch thinner. So the outside were like 1 1/4 inches, and the center was 3/4 of an inch by the time we're done. So you just want to make sure you're supporting it. Did anyone happen to see where that snowstorm came from? So I got this all flattened out, and I already went ahead and sanded it down to 120 grits. I'm now going to go ahead and clean up these edges all along the 4 sides. I'm going to start with one side and then square it off from this side. So I just measured 4 1/8, which is the width of my thick side of my handsaw. And I'm going to start from that. Like I said, I'm going to start from this side and just work my way around. Also, after sanding, this was actually the bottom side that was in the mold. And I actually ended up deciding this has a lot cooler colors. Like there's some purple down here, there's some gray, there's some green in this side. So ultimately this is going to end up being the top side, even though I originally thought it would be the other side. So this is the bottom. It's been sanded down to 400 grit to match the wood on the bottom side. The epoxy on the sides and the top have been sanded down to 3000 grit. And then I applied plastic polishing compound onto the epoxy just to finish it off to make it nice and smooth. Now I'm just going ahead and putting the finish on all the sides of this table. If you're wondering what's up with the red triangles in the sides, or on the sides of this board, that is what I am going to use. Once this side's finished, I'm going to flip the board over. And then that way I can apply directly to the top of this. And once I get this side coated, I will flip to the other side, and then I will show you how that looks right before I put the coat on it. Also, if you find yourself ever in need of a lot of rags, the good way to do this is to actually use old shirts that may be past their prime. In fact, my wife would probably be happy to hear this, but the shirt that I'm actually currently wearing is probably not long for this world and probably will be turned into a rag soon. And it just gives you a cheap, easy way to get rags if you're looking to save a bit of money in this process. So as you can see, this already looks a lot shinier than the other side, even without the finish applied. And now I'm just going to keep wiping down, and I'll show you once everything's done. Here it is with the finish put on, and this is going to be the top side, so this is what it's going to look like when it's fully finished. I need to give this a day to dry and then wipe off any extra that's on it. Then I have to decide if I want to put a second coat of finish on or if that's good. Then we can put the legs on, and then we'll be done. So I'll see you in a second. So I flipped the table back over, so this is the bottom. I'm going to start putting the legs on, and I'm using painter's tape. That way I don't mar up the bottom of the table when I'm drawing on it with all these little dots you can see, and I don't scuff it up when I'm drilling into it. And one thing I forgot to mention in my last clip was that I was doing a wet sand on this table, So that way I got all the little end grains to raise up between each sanding, and that way you got a nice perfectly smooth finish on the table. So I'm going to just show you the completed table in a second. Here's the completed table. I love the way all the grain patterns meld together and how everything complements each other on this table. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe and like my channel. Another benefit of subscribing is you never have to remember how to spell Kittatinny again. So thank you for watching. Have a good one.